Welcome to this explainer on the evolution of management thought. We're going to break down all the major theories and thinkers that have shaped how we work today, all to get you ready for your exams.
So here's our plan for today. We'll start with why we even need management in the first place. Then we'll journey through the early machine and human approaches to work. After that, we'll look at the modern big picture ideas. And we'll wrap it all up with some practice questions to make sure you're ready for your exam.
All right, let's start at the very beginning. Where did this whole idea of management even come from? Well, our story kicks off during a massive change in the world, the Industrial Revolution. Think about it. Before factories, most work was done on a very small scale. But suddenly, you have these huge factories with hundreds, sometimes thousands of people, all working with new machines and raw materials. This created a brand new, massive problem. How do you get all of that to work together efficiently? And that is the exact problem management theory was created to solve. Now, even before we get to the big, famous theories, some early pioneers were already on the case. You had people like Robert Owen, who was one of the first to say, hey, maybe the work environment actually affects how people perform. And Charles Babbage, who pushed the idea of specialization, dividing work into smaller tasks. They really set the stage for everything that came next. And that brings us to our first major school of thought, the classical approach. The core idea here was pretty simple, really. They looked at an organization and thought of it like a machine. And if it's a machine, that means every single part can be engineered and perfected to get the most efficient output possible. So, this classical approach, it's not just one single idea. It actually breaks down into three key schools. You've got scientific management, which zooms in on individual tasks. Then there's administrative management, which looks at the organization as a whole. And finally, the bureaucratic model from thinkers like Max Weber, which is all about formal structure and rules. Okay, here's your first big MCQ alert. A very common trick question on exams will try to tell you there are more than three classical schools. Don't fall for it. Just remember the big three: scientific, administrative, and bureaucratic. That's it. When you hear scientific management, you should immediately think of Frederick Taylor. He was the main guy, and his whole philosophy was that for any job, there is one single best way to do it. His method was to scientifically study the job, pick the perfect person for it, train them in that one best way, and then have managers watch over them to make sure they followed the method exactly. But you can probably see the problem here, right? This machine view of people had some major flaws. It totally ignored the human side of work. It basically treated workers like cogs in a machine who are only motivated by money, completely overlooking the fact that people need to feel valued and get some satisfaction from their jobs. Okay, next up is Henri Fayol and his administrative management. Now, you've got to pay close attention here because he has two principles that are super easy to mix up on an exam. First, unity of command. That just means an employee should only get orders from one boss. Simple enough. But then there's unity of direction. That means for any group of activities with the same goal, there should be one plan and one boss. So, for your exam, here's the dead simple way to remember this. Just think. Command is about a person, one boss per person, and direction is about a plan, one plan per goal. This difference is a classic setup for a tricky multiple-choice question. You know, all those weaknesses we just talked about in the classical approach, that cold, rigid, mechanical view of workers, well, that led directly to the next big evolution in management thinking, the behavioral approach. So just think about it for a second. If you're only focusing on the structure, the rules, the efficiency, what huge, essential element are you completely ignoring? Yep, the people. The behavioral approach finally shifted the focus from the machine to the humans running it. It started bringing in ideas from psychology and sociology to try and understand how people's thoughts, feelings, and social groups actually impact their productivity. This slide sums up the really famous Hawthorne studies. The story is fascinating. Researchers went into a factory and started changing physical things, like the lighting, expecting that to change productivity. But here's the crazy part. Productivity went up no matter what they did. The huge insight was that it wasn't the lights, it was the attention. The workers felt valued, and that proved that social and psychological factors are incredibly powerful motivators. Building on this, we get Douglas McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. It's a really simple but powerful idea. He said there are basically two kinds of managers. A Theory X manager believes people are fundamentally lazy and have to be pushed to work.
But a Theory Y manager believes people are naturally self-motivated and actually want to do a good job. And the theory you believe in will totally shape how you manage.
All right, so let's fast forward a bit and see how this all comes together in modern management. The key thing about these approaches is that they don't throw out the old ideas. Instead, they try to integrate the classical focus on structure with the behavioral focus on people. So systems theory basically says an organization isn't just a collection of separate departments. It's more like a living thing, a single interconnected system. What happens in marketing is going to affect production, which is going to affect finance, and so on. It also emphasizes that the whole system is constantly interacting with the outside world. And that idea of interconnectedness leads us to a really crucial modern concept. This quote right here, it's the absolute heart of contingency theory. And you'll notice it's a direct attack on Frederick Taylor's old idea that there was one best way to do things. So what does contingent really mean? In simple terms, it just means it depends. The big takeaway here is flexibility. Contingency theory says the right way to manage depends entirely on the context. The management style that works for a fast-paced tech startup is going to be a disaster in a government agency. The manager's job is to analyze the situation and then choose the right approach for that specific moment. All right, we've covered a lot of ground, from machines to people to the big picture. Now it's time to put what you've learned to the test, with some practice questions just like the ones you might see on your exam. Okay, first question. Take a look and think carefully. Which one of these is the odd one out? Which one just doesn't belong with the others? And the correct answer is D, the behavioral approach. Remember our MCQ alert from earlier? We said the classical approach has just 3 schools: scientific, administrative, and bureaucratic. The behavioral school came later as a reaction against that classical way of thinking. Here's a question about another key figure from the behavioral approach, Abraham Maslow and his famous hierarchy of needs. So in that pyramid of needs, where would something like job security or health insurance fit in? The correct answer here is D, safety needs. And let me tell you, this is a classic exam trap. It's tempting to think of physiological needs because a job gets you money for food. But the security of the job, the feeling that you're protected from future harm, that falls squarely under safety. Okay, last practice question. Think back to those modern theories we discussed. Which one is all about adapting your style to the specific situation you're in? And the answer is C, contingency theory. That key phrase, no one best way, is literally the definition of this theory. In fact, it's the complete opposite of scientific management, which argues there is one best way. Systems theory is about how parts connect, and administrative theory gives general rules, but only contingency theory is defined by that it depends approach. Okay, to wrap this all up, here are the absolute must-know, high-yield points for your exam. Know the 3 schools of the classical approach. Remember that the Hawthorne studies proved social factors are key. Understand the difference between McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. And finally, know that contingency theory means there is no one best way. If you can lock these in, you'll be in great shape. And I'll leave you with this one final thought. This story isn't over, not even close. With massive challenges on the horizon like artificial intelligence, fully remote global teams, and climate change, a whole new set of management problems are emerging right now. The next chapter in the evolution of management is being written as we speak.